Welcome to the Parsha Minute. This week's Parsha is Parsha's Vayera. In this week's Parsha, we have a fascinating story which has really changed the world, and we are currently experiencing the consequences or the results of that story. So there's a famous part of the Parsha which is known as the Akedah, in which Hashem actually challenges Avram, our father Abraham, with a test. And he tells him as follows. He says, take your son Yitzchak, Isaac, and bring him up as a sacrifice. Now it's interesting to note, he doesn't say slaughter him or kill him as a sacrifice. He says bring him up as a sacrifice on the altar. And Avram understands that to mean that bring him up as a sacrifice and slaughter him. And Avram accepts the word of Hashem. He knows it's Hashem, and he loves Hashem. And as much as it sounds strange, but Hashem is the source of all life. It's the source of everything he can hope and be and grow and do is all resting with Hashem. If that's what Hashem wants, he's going to do it. Now, before that challenge, well, just not to keep you in suspense, in the end, Hashem stops him. But before that whole story is recorded, the Torah says as follows. And when you look at the Torah, it says, and it was after these things, Hashem tested Avraham. And if you look in the Torah, it doesn't say after what things. Now, there was something recorded in the Torah before that, but that's not at all related to the test. So the Medrash, the oral law, tells us the rest of the story. And the rest of the story is as follows. There was a conversation between Yishmael, as we know, the father of the Arabs, and Yitzchak. And here's the conversation. Yishmael, who had his circumcision done at the age of 13 years old, challenges Yitzchak. And he says, big deal. You had a circumcision at 8 days old. I had a circumcision for God when I was 13 years old. So you can't compare it to me. So Yitzchak responds and says, if Hashem would want me to sacrifice my life, I would do it. And it was after these things, after this conversation, and now Hashem tested Avraham. In other words, Hashem was not ready to test Avraham to sacrifice Yitzchak if Yitzchak wasn't game for it. But after this conversation, Yitzchak said, I'm willing to do it. That's the story that the Medrash tells us. Now the Zohar tells us the rest of that story. And it says as follows. But before I tell you what the Zohar says, in last week's Parsha, actually we spoke about circumcision, and a bris is a treaty. We do our part, Hashem does his. Our part is doing the circumcision. Hashem's part gives us the land of Israel. So in other words, we have the land of Israel in the merit of our commitment to the bris milah, to the circumcision. So the Zohar, let's go back to the Zohar. So the Zohar says, but in the end, Isaac, Yitzchak, didn't sacrifice himself because Hashem stopped Avram. He said, stop. I don't want you to kill him. I just wanted to bring him up as a sacrifice on the altar, but don't kill him. So in the end, Yitzchak never demonstrated with completion that he gave up his life. So in the end, Yishmael has one step over us. So the Zohar says that before Yitzchak, the children of Yitzchak will gain the land of Israel to be heirs for eternity. That didn't happen yet. Before that happens, which will happen soon with the coming of Mashiach, but before that happens, Yishmael is going to get the land of Israel before that point in time. Because he has one step over us. He did the bris milah at the age of 13, and Yitzchak never did it at such an old age. That's the end of the Zohar. And here's where I want to continue from the Zohar. If you take a look in the history of the Jewish people, there was never a time, from the time the Jewish people entered the land of Israel, 3,300 years ago, from the time we entered the land of Israel, till today, there was never a period in Jewish history that millions of Jews did not do circumcision. We've always been doing it. The religious Jews, the non-observant Jews, if a person knows he's Jewish, he does circumcision on his child. There was one period where that didn't happen, and that was the Jews of the Soviet Union. For 70 years, millions of Jews did not do circumcision. No one can judge them. I mean, it's very difficult to appreciate those who didn't know, don't know what it's about. But it happened. And now Hashem took the Jews of the Soviet Union, brought them to Israel, brought them to America, brought them to Germany, and there are thousands and thousands and perhaps hundreds of thousands of Jewish people who are having their bris milah beyond the age of 13. I know someone personally, a dear friend of mine, who had a bris at the age of 68. And there are people who have it older, and people who are younger. But 13 is nothing. 13, there's so many people who had it at 30 and 35 and 40 and 50. So I think, based on that Zohar, that thanks to the Russian immigration, the Jews of Russia who have undertaken to have a bris milah, we're going to get the land of Israel. And speedily in our days, Hashem will bring us all back and say, you finally answered Yishmael. Have a great Shabbos. Thank you.